Interstellar is one of the most critically acclaimed science fiction movies ever made. Released 10 years ago, Christopher Nolan created a classic that has remained in people's hearts over the past decade. In this video, I'm gonna go through Interstellar and not only cover the movie itself and how it holds up, but also dive deep into the fascinating production and see how Interstellar was made. So, let's travel back in time and look at the production of Interstellar. Production on Interstellar began all the way back in 2006, 8 years prior to the movie's release. After previously working on the film Contact in 1997, theoretical physicist Kip Thorne had aspirations of working on what he called a hard science fiction film. Not a sci-fi fantasy film or a sci-fi film that liberally played with the laws of physics, but a film that would remain as true to science as a film can possibly be. He and a friend, Linda Obst, worked on an 8-page screenplay which would inevitably become Interstellar. In March 2007, Jonathan Nolan was brought on to take the treatment and adapt it into a fully fledged screenplay. Just in case the name doesn't sound familiar to you, Jonathan Nolan is indeed Christopher Nolan's brother. Paramount Pictures picked up the film and attached Steven Spielberg of all people to direct the project. John Nolan wanted the film to focus less on the existential dread that came with many science fiction movies, and instead wanted his film to focus on love and hope, two themes that will eventually become a major part of Interstellar.
And I felt like I was really fed up with watching fiction that concentrated on how bad we were and we'd screwed everything up. And
in 2009, Spielberg left the project after he moved his production company DreamWorks away from Paramount. The vacancy led to John Nolan recommending his brother Christopher to direct the project instead. Now, outside the obvious of John and Chris being brothers, why did John want his brother to direct the film? After the success of his Batman movies along with Inception, Christopher Nolan was one of the hottest directors in Hollywood. Nolan's films weren't just good, however. Nolan always wanted to push the boundaries of filmmaking. He wanted his films to have abstract ideas, complex thoughts, and dense characters.
He's making a movie that's smart. He's making a movie that's going to challenge you, the viewer. He's going to make he's not going to push a message, but there's going to be, in this one, I think there's messages in it that are very challenging to mankind.
Time was also something Chris had always been interested in exploring. Memento, The Prestige, and Inception were all films that played into the illusion of time. Even films after Interstellar like Tenet and Oppenheimer would continue to use time as a key element of the story. John and Chris would also often share ideas together since the two were very close. When John brought the script for Interstellar to Chris, he could tell that Chris was deeply interested in the project. So in January of 2013, shortly after the release of his latest film, The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan signed on to direct Interstellar. Now, Chris joining the project meant that a few changes would be made. First and foremost, Nolan would want to ground his science fiction film in realism. Of course, part of this means using as many practical effects as possible so the film could stand the test of time, but it also meant avoiding futurism. While Interstellar doesn't give its audience an exact date of when it takes place, the film does take place in the future. Chris didn't want this film to feel like it was from the future, however. He wanted to ground it in as much technology that we might see today.
We wanted to always be tapping into that history. We wanted to always be seeing a classic sort of astronaut figure, not too futuristic an idea of them.
Chris would also take some of his science fiction ideas and concepts he had thought of over the years and add it to Interstellar. This mostly revolved around Chris's concerns about the future of space exploration. Chris was worried the human race was growing complacent and would lose interest in chasing the stars, so he wanted his film to motivate the next generation of astronauts to continue that voyage into space.
Maybe this movie can be the inspiration until we start flying again, or the inspiration to start flying again. So let's put an idea out there that gets young people interested in wanting to say, I want to do that.
I think it would be really thrilling if people got some sense from this film that these ideas are worth thinking about, beyond the scope of just watching Interstellar.
John Nolan, Chris Nolan, and Kip Thorne rewrote the script to focus on these new ideas. There were lots of movies that inspired Christopher Nolan during the making of this film. The film WALL-E, aka the best film ever made, was a film that was cited as an inspiration for the apocalyptic dread that surrounded the Earth. The design of the farm and the fields of corn was something he drew from old Superman movies, for for inspiration, and with the design of the spaceships, he looked at 2001: A Space Odyssey for inspiration. More importantly than all this was Nolan's desire to shoot the film in IMAX. The scale of 2001: A Space Odyssey was something that captured his imagination when he was younger, so he wanted his film to be able to portray that same scale. IMAX was often used sparingly in films, to only highlight specific sequences that could benefit from IMAX. Nolan wanted to push these boundaries, however, and decided to film most of the movie in IMAX. Nolan studied real IMAX footage that was shot in space, how it was used not only outside the space station, but inside as well. Nolan's new cinematographer, Hoyte van Hoytema, took up this challenge, often carrying around the 95-pound camera like it was a GoPro. Now, despite all these inspirations, Kip Thorne was still heavily involved to make sure that the film stayed as true to science as possible, since that was the reason the film was being made in the first place.
The collaboration has produced visualization of things which nobody had ever managed to do before. We potentially may have discovered a couple of new things that were lurking there inside the mathematics, inside the physics.
The scientific accuracy of this film has been studied to death by people way smarter than me. Scientists all over the world have debated the concepts and the math used in this film. A book about the science of the film was even published. So while Thorne and others were working on the science of the movie, it was time for Nolan to actually begin making Interstellar. Surprisingly, the first thing Nolan did was reach out to his good buddy Hans Zimmer to develop the main parts of the score. Nolan is big on wanting his audience to feel something, and what better way of doing that than making sure the score is just right. Nolan didn't even tell Hans that the film was a science fiction film. He told Hans that it was a film about love and hope, a film about the bond between a father and a child. Hans Zimmer said he used his own love for his son as an inspiration for the score of Interstellar.
I sat down and I wrote this piece really about what it feels like to be a father and what it feels like to have a son, and I was writing about my son.
Nolan didn't want Interstellar to have a science fiction score to it. He wanted it to be a lot more grounded in the personal relationships. So the two traveled to a church in England to use an organ as the main instrument for the score. Hans Zimmer stated that the organ was the perfect instrument to emphasize that human element of the score. Nolan further believed that the organ from a church gave the film this almost religious-like feel to it, or as he described it, this metaphysical feeling to it. While Hans Zimmer went on to write the score, it was time to start filming the movie. Nolan casted Matthew McConaughey as the lead for this movie, because McConaughey could play the everyday kind of guy very well. You may start to notice the theme here, whether it be the concepts of this movie, the score behind the movie, or the lead actor for the main character. Almost every decision made during the production of Interstellar was to emphasize the human element, because Nolan knows it's not the wormholes or the black holes or fifth dimension tesseracts that draw us into the story, it's the people, the realism, and the themes. This human element is felt in almost every aspect of the movie. When it came to the black hole, the look and the creation of it was done with real science in mind.
Neither wormholes nor black holes have been depicted in any Hollywood movie in the way that they actually would appear. This is the first time that the depiction began with Einstein's general relativity equations.
I won't even attempt to understand this science because it'll probably give me a nosebleed, but I'm sure plenty of people out there can appreciate it. When it came to creating the Endurance, the main spaceship of the movie, Nolan wanted to make it as practical as possible. Of course, he couldn't build a life-sized Endurance, but he was able to work around that. Life-sized parts of the Endurance were made with exquisite detail. Old parts from NASA and airplanes were used to add this grittiness to the Endurance. Also, many facets of the ship like the seats, the rooms, or even the handles made the ship feel like a real space that people moving around in zero-G would have to navigate.
How would you move around this space, in zero-G, So how would you get from here to there, around to your airlock, and then around here? So you'd have to pull yourself around.
Oftentimes, multiple of the same set would be created so they could film the zero-G sequences as realistically as possible. One set would be vertical to move characters up and down, and another would be horizontal to move the characters from left to right. Outside these little modules that were created to scale, miniatures were also a big part of this movie. Of course, not everything in this film would be practically done, but the use of miniatures allowed a lot more than you'd think to be filmed in camera. This is why 10 years later, so many of these these effects look like they haven't aged a day. This includes the scene where Matt Damon's character was blown out of the airlock, something that was actually able to be filmed in camera. The robot's case and TARS were created practically as well. Of course, like most things in this movie, not everything about it was practical, but most of the time these two machines were used as puppets rather than CG characters. So much of the science fiction part of this movie was done practically. The other part of this movie that was also done practically were the real locations used for filming this movie. The three main outdoor locations were Miller's Planet, Man's Planet, and the farm. Both Miller's and Man's Planets were actually filmed in Iceland. A lot of challenges came along with filming in these locations. The intensely cold waters that made up Miller's Planet were very difficult to shoot in, but the team was able to work it out, even simulating a landing of a real-sized shuttle. Man's Planet came with its own challenges as well. Maybe the most impressive part of this entire production has to be the farm. Even though the area is supposed to take place in Middle America, Nolan and his team actually went to Canada to create this entire set. Nolan got this idea from the old Superman movies, since the Clark farm was filmed in Canada as well. The team was able to create the entire house and build it right in this vast landscape. The most famous part of the production of this film was the fact that Nolan had over 500 acres of corn planted for the movie.
We have 350 acres. At another location, we have another 500 acres. You know, when you look at it and its scale, it's quite huge.
This was a major risk for Nolan and his team. For one, the location they chose in Canada wasn't an ideal place to grow corn. Initially, the corn barely grew and Nolan became worried, because if this didn't work, not only would this cost the studio a lot of money, but it would also mean that Nolan would have to digitally create the corn, aka his worst nightmare. But magically, when it came time to shoot, the corn grew to the perfect height. When filming was done, Nolan was even able to sell all the corn for a profit. That's how much this risk paid off for him.
If all the corn was lost, then we would never get our money back. But if he sold it or used it as silage, then it was free. Which at the end of the day, we ended up making all of it back because they cropped it pretty well.
Nolan and his team also brought in these gigantic fans to simulate the dust storms. This fake dust went everywhere, but of course, going through all this effort was better than doing it digitally. Now, of everything that was made during the production of this movie, the hardest thing for the team was the 5-dimensional tesseract at the end. Crafting a 4 or 5-dimensional location in the 3 dimensions that we live in is not easy. Nolan had to go to the drawing board and map out what this would feasibly look like. When it came down to the sets, of course a lot of it was done digitally, but so much of it was done practically as well. Murph's bedroom was built over and over again to make it as easy for McConaughey to act as possible. When you listen to the interviews from the actors and the crew talking about Christopher Nolan, they have nothing but positive things to say. In the early 2010s, Anne Hathaway was supposedly in the middle of a social media campaign where everyone hated her for some reason. This had her worrying about the future of her career, but Nolan didn't give a shit about the social media hate and brought her on for Interstellar anyway. After going through the broad strokes of the production, it's obvious how much passion and dedication Christopher Nolan has for the art of filmmaking, and this passion is infectious for the entire crew. This is why no actors have ever said anything bad about Christopher Nolan, and this is also why major A-list actors are willing to take small roles just to be in his films.
I mean, it's pretty obvious from his movies he's got an exceptional mind. But he owns that. He doesn't, without being imperious, without being arrogant, he's very present and he's so bright.
If you want a more in-depth look into the production of Interstellar, I highly recommend checking out the video, The Insane IMAX Production of Interstellar from Frame Voyager. It was an excellently researched video, so when you finish this one, go over there to check out that one. Christopher Nolan is a mastermind when it comes to putting his vision on the big screen. Everything in this production shows that. But how good was his vision actually? Well, let's dive deep into the story of Interstellar. But before continuing on with the rest of this video, only 20.6% of viewers are subscribed to this channel. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. Before we talk about anything, we have to talk about the themes. If there's anything to take away from a Christopher Nolan film, it's that he's always trying to explore some big message. Some may say this is what makes Nolan's films so great, and others would argue this often comes to the detriment of the films. Regardless of your opinion on that, Interstellar is clearly about two things: love and faith. Every character's role in this movie and their core beliefs stem from their perspective on love or faith. A big criticism of Interstellar are the characters. characters. Not necessarily that they're shallow or bad, but that they're more so vehicles to convey Nolan's message. Instead of the story serving the characters, in Nolan films, often the characters serve the story. Of his entire filmography, only Batman Begins and Oppenheimer don't fit this mold. I think whether or not you see this as a flaw depends on your perspective of movies. If you love movies because you love stories and you love rich characters, then maybe Nolan isn't your favorite director in the world. Nolan is a filmmaker more than anything. He wants his stories to be told as movies. He wants his movies to resonate in a way a television show or a book could never. Through his craftsmanship, he wants you to feel something more than anything. Many argue a lot of Nolan's films are too complex because he poses these huge ideas. Sometimes these ideas are so vast that it can make the film borderline unwatchable. While this may or may not be true, I do believe Nolan cares far more about how the audience feels. In Interstellar, sure, he wants you to think about humanity and space travel, but he also wants you to feel that love between a father and a daughter. While the characters of Cooper and Murph aren't the most complex characters in the world, Nolan definitely succeeds in making you feel the love between a father and a daughter, especially since these two characters don't spend that much screen time together. So let's look into these characters. Cooper and Murph are obviously the main characters, but both go on different arcs revolving around their views of faith. Cooper is far more pragmatic than anything. He doesn't believe something unless there is empirical evidence in front of him. He scoffs at Murph when she talks about ghosts and only kinda believes her once he sees with his own eyes the anomaly. This character trait is reinforced a lot throughout the first 3/4 of the movie. What's eventually going to happen with Cooper is that he's going to go on a pretty standard character arc, one where, as the story progresses, Cooper will begin to become less pragmatic and become more faithful that love will prevail. This arc will be contrasted with Murph's arc. Murph begins the story as someone who is faithful. She believes in things that you can't rationalize. She believes in ghosts in the beginning of the movie as the earliest example. This faith that she has is going to be tested throughout the movie. So unlike Cooper, who goes on this standard character arc, Murph will go on a flat arc. She has a belief, and as she is tested, we will see if that belief holds firm. Throughout the first act of the movie, which I would argue is everything until the point Cooper leaves for the mission, these traits in Cooper and Murph are reinforced. As we start to learn about Anne Hathaway's character, Dr. Brand, we learn she is a lot more like Murph than she is Cooper. When that anomaly shows up, she believes it's some fifth dimensional being saying hi to her, even though there is no evidence to support that. And then her speech about love towards the middle of the movie also reflects her faithful personality. This first act sets up the characters fairly well. Again, they're not the most rich characters in the world, but we understand their beliefs, and we feel that love between Murph and Cooper, which is arguably the most important part of the movie. The other thing this opening act accomplishes is world building, and this is mostly done through exposition. We learn there's this plague called the Blight, where dust storms are destroying the food supply around the world. There's been some debate about the Blight being an allegory for climate change. Some argue that it is an allegory for climate change because the climate is changing. Others would argue that it's not an effective allegory because it's never stated that the Blight is something that resulted from humans. Both points are fair, but the YouTube channel Story Street made a great point that I tend to agree with in his video about Interstellar. He said the Blight is less of an allegory for climate change and more of a cosmic force that is threatening humanity. The people of Earth are regressing in the world of Interstellar. They are no longer interested in traveling the stars. They just care about surviving where they can. The Blight represents the dangers of complacency, that if humans don't do anything, they're going to die off. The early antagonists of the films are the teachers who are discouraging Murph's interest in space exploration. They are saying that Murph needs to use a textbook where it stated that the moon landing was fake to discourage space exploration. And Cooper is appalled by this. When you listen to all the interviews Nolan has done for this film, he has repeated multiple times that one of the messages of this film is the importance of space exploration. He sees this human complacency as a bad thing, but not once does he talk about climate change. So because of that, I would agree with Story Street's analysis. So that's how Interstellar world builds in the beginning of the movie, by establishing the complacency of humanity and what that would realistically look like. The last thing this opening act does, and this is one of the biggest strengths of the movie, is establish time as the antagonist of the film. Time is the villain of Interstellar. When the first act ends, theoretically Cooper and Brand and the others can take as long as they want because there is no rush for Plan B, which is recolonizing humanity. But when Cooper says goodbye to Murph, tension is created by Cooper saying he will come back. Interstellar is now not only a film about space exploration, but it is literally a race against time. Can Cooper complete his mission and fulfill his promise to return to Murph, saving the rest of humanity humanity on Earth is also mentioned, but it's returning to Murph where the real stakes are. Entering the second act of the film, it is reinforced that time is the enemy. The time dilation on Miller's planet was such a brilliant and unique narrative technique. Usually when time is the enemy, it's because there's a countdown timer. It's a very common trope, but it's common because it's effective. With Miller's planet, there's no countdown, but the more time they spend on the planet, the more time Cooper will miss with Murph. There's a really neat detail in the film that's not emphasized, but I wish it was. While they're on Miller's planet, the music has this beat of a tick roughly every second.
Oh shit. That was moving away from it.
What this tick represents is a day passing on Earth. So the next time you're watching this film, keeping in mind that a day passes pretty much every second adds so much more tension to the sequence. It was really smart. Cooper and Brand return back to the ship and we learn that 23 years have passed in the few hours that they were on Miller's planet. This leads to the recording scene, which is of course one of the most emotional scenes of the movie. The scene obviously works because any human being over the age of 15 can relate to that feeling of the passage of time. We often feel like we wasted time and we wish we could have it back. In Interstellar, 23 years was literally wasted, and that's devastating for Cooper. A big portion of his children's lives have passed and he wasn't there to experience it. Where this scene is also really effective is showing the threat of time. Usually in a movie when there's a villain, there's a scene where we see how much of a threat the villain is. We aren't just told they're a threat, we are shown how much of a threat they are. This recording scene shows us the threat of time. By seeing how much his children have aged, we are shown what can happen if time isn't taken seriously. It will hurt our characters. As the characters debate which planet they should go to next, we see a bit more of that pragmatism from Cooper. Brand wants to go to Edmund's planet, but Cooper rejects it because Brand is in love with Edmund. Since Man is sending back data, he sees that as the sensible place to go to. During this interaction, Cooper sees Brand's faith in love as a flaw. It does come across like Cooper only rejects Brand's plan because of her personal feelings for Edmund. Brand gives her speech about love transcending time and space, and Cooper ignores that for the moment. He hasn't gone on the arc yet. He still sees everything logically, with no faith in the unknown. Many argue that the speech Brand gives is a bit on the nose, and I can agree with that. The main reason I would say it works here is because of the desperation of the moment. Brand is so desperate to see the man she loves that she is a bit corny with her answer, so I can give it a pass. For the first time since the first act, we return to Earth and we catch up on Murph and the rest of the characters. Of course, we see how hurt Murph is that her father hasn't returned, but she's hurt so much because of how much faith she has that he will return. Considering how much faith is a part of her identity, it would only make sense that she would be more devastated than normal if her father never returned. In her work with Brand Sr., we see that her optimism and faith still remains in the other aspects of her life. Despite little progress being made over 20 years, she still has faith that she can solve this problem and save humanity. But of course, when Brand Sr. is dying, we learn the truth that he has lied all along, that supposedly there is no hope and that he lied to Cooper because if he didn't believe he could return home, he would have never gone on the mission in the first place. This is where Murph is now tested in her arc. All the science says humanity is screwed, that there is no hope in solving these problems, and essentially that they should give up. So will Murph change and believe Brand Sr., or will she remain firm in her belief in faith? At first, she does change. She tells her brother that their father abandoned them and that he will never come back. She also wants to evacuate his family to some bunker because there is no hope for them anywhere else. This is the lowest point of the film. So Cooper and company visit Man, and he has a similar belief system to Brand Sr. Man's situation reflects back to the film's discussion of evil Cooper and Brand had earlier in the film. Is a lion evil for killing its prey? Was Brand Sr. evil in ensuring the survival of humanity by lying to Cooper? Was Man evil in essentially setting a trap so he could survive? The situations are obviously different. So Man justifies his actions by saying it's human nature to do something selfish, that he had no choice. Man and Brand Sr. had this belief that there is no hope for the future and that they need to do the logical thing to manipulate those around them to survive. This is what forces Cooper to change. We then get to the docking scene, which is maybe the most famous part of this movie. The tension that is created during this scene is masterful. We know what the stakes are. If Cooper doesn't succeed, he won't see his daughter again, he will die, and humanity will die. Literally, the fate of humanity lies on his shoulders. The practical effects used to create this scene of course makes it feel so real, adding to that tension. But to be frank, the biggest reason the scene is so effective is simply because of the score. Hans Zimmer is a master at what he does. I remember watching this scene for the first time and being completely sucked into that moment. I'm convinced the first time I saw this, I didn't blink once. That's how tense it was. The other part of the scene that people seem to forget is that this is where Cooper changes. All movie he believes in logic and reason. Tars is telling Cooper that docking here will be impossible, but to him it's necessary. I'm sure any pilot could tell you how hard pulling this off would really be. All logic points against even trying to do this, but in order to succeed, Cooper has to have faith. He needs to look past reason or logic and just believe he can do this. And after the most tense 3 minutes of my life, he succeeds. In this moment, Cooper's mindset completely shifts. He's willing to enter a black hole at the slim chance that he can save humanity. Why? Because he has faith. He believes that he can do it. No longer does he reason about it, he just does it. We then get to the ending of the movie. Cooper enters this fifth dimensional tesseract where he can manipulate time. This sequence is where I feel so conflicted about Christopher Nolan movies. Christopher Nolan, as we discussed before, is a master at making you feel something. During this entire sequence, we feel how much it hurts him having to watch the moment he left Murph. When he manipulates the gravity on the watch and Murph figures this out, we feel the triumph of love. The speech that Brand gave earlier in the film really hits home here. But when I sit down and think about this entire sequence, it just feels so convenient. The whole reason Cooper and his team were able to enter this other part of the galaxy was because a supernatural they put a wormhole next to Saturn. The whole reason Cooper is in this position is because this supernatural they configured a 5-dimensional space in 3 dimensions so Cooper can manipulate time. When he succeeds, this supernatural they sends him straight back to his daughter and the station she built. I feel like with any other movie, this would all feel so convenient. Of course, Cooper's faith is rewarded because God figures are at play here. You could argue we're supposed to believe that this is some super advanced future version of the human race. I'm not sure I buy that. This next thing is totally a me issue, but I struggle with the concept that gravity can transcend space and time. Maybe I should sit down and read Kip Thorne's book, or maybe one of you in the comments can explain this better to me. It's just another thing that I find convenient. I guess all my complaints here are just a testament to how great of a filmmaker Christopher Nolan is. During The Dark Knight Rises, that movie is littered with plot holes, but I'm so caught up with the story that I tend to ignore them. In Interstellar, the arcs of both Cooper and Murph climax during this tesseract sequence. Cooper doesn't know that his plan will work, but he has faith that his love for his daughter will transcend space and time. He believes that because he gave Murph this watch, she will look at it again and see the answers to her questions. Murph, on the other hand, was starting to lose faith that she could never reconnect with her father, that all hope was lost and that she should just give up on saving humanity. But one last time she went back into her room because deep down she never lost faith that her father would return. And she was right. She read the watch and was able to save the human race. She never gave up hope, even though she was close. So the movie ends, humanity is saved, and Cooper reunites with his daughter. Despite my issues with this movie, whether it be the depth of the characters or the conveniences I'm asked to overlook, I can't help but love this movie. Whenever I watch a movie like The Titanic, a movie I love by the way, I can't help but feel like I need to quit my job and pursue my passions in life. I can't help but feel like one day I want to love someone as much as these two love each other. With Interstellar, I can't help but feel like love is really something more powerful than I thought. Maybe love is something that can really transcend space and time. I recently did a video on the Netflix series Arcane, and there's a quote in that show that really stuck with me. The character Victor says, "Humanity, our very essence, is inescapable. Our emotions, rage, compassion, hate, two sides of the same coin, intractably bound. That which inspires us to our greatest good is also the cause of our greatest evil." I can't help but apply love to that quote as well. Love really does make human beings do remarkable things, for both good and bad. When you think about it, love kind of does transcend space and time. Think about your favorite memory, or any memory. Do you remember your 62nd day of work? No, you probably don't even know which day your 62nd day of work was. But do you remember your wedding? Do you remember your 21st birthday? Do you remember where you were when you subscribed to the Goldman? Of course you remember all these moments because of how much you loved those moments. Close your eyes. You can remember what you were wearing, what the room looked like, what music you heard, what it smelled like. The love for that moment transcended space and time. Think about a person you love. Maybe you haven't spoken to them for a day, a month, or even a year. but you still love them. Hasn't that love transcended space and time? Or think about your favorite restaurant. You can picture yourself there right now eating your favorite meal. Hasn't that feeling of love transcended space and time? Maybe I'm a bit too pragmatic to believe in something like this. Or maybe I need to go on a character arc like Cooper and start to have more faith in things I can't explain. Interstellar, despite its flaws, is a really powerful film. I've heard a surprising amount of people say that Interstellar is their favorite film ever. But what was the reception of this film when it first came out? Let's go to the ratings and see. Interstellar finished with a 73% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and an 86% audience score. On IMDb, Interstellar is rated as an 8.7 out of 10, which according to IMDb would make Interstellar the third highest rated film of Christopher Nolan's filmography. Interstellar grossed $681 million, making it the 10th highest grossing film of 2014. What do you guys think about Interstellar? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Is it overrated? Let me know down below. Up next, we're gonna go back to Star Wars and cover the original trilogy. Up first, A New Hope. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to like the Claw Squad, and I will see you guys next time.